Welcome back to The Practical Woodsman. I'm Rhett, the creator and host of The Practical Woodsman. That's right. It's my genius which has brought this all into existence. Scientists and philosophers everywhere studying my noggin to try to figure out how it works and harness its powers. I don't know about where you all are at, but here where I am, we're experiencing a pretty serious drought. And this comes on the heels of a drought, a summer-long drought that we had just this past summer. And this summer started off nice with rain here and there. But something happened in the past month or so where we got a real serious drought that come in. In fact, as you can see in these images here, it's dried up a lake that everybody knows and is talking about in these here parts. Everybody's jawing about it. About how the lake is all dried up, doesn't have no water in it. Well, it might surprise you that the topic I'd like to talk about in this adventure of The Practical Woodsman is not about droughts. Although I would like to mention that if you are in a drought, and especially in the fall time, you want to be awfully careful about starting fires. In fact, I'd recommend against it. Definitely not during the day. You don't want to start any fires during the day. You want to make sure you do it at night, and certainly not if there's any moving wind. But the droughts are not what I want to talk about, and fire in drought is not what I want to talk about. Counterintuitively, I want to talk about rain and these kind of teeter-totter temperatures that happen during autumn in Appalachia. What a beautiful time of year. You know, I'm sure everybody thinks, what a beautiful time of year to get up into those mountains. A lot of folks, they think about autumn or fall and they think about New England. Get up there into Maine, Vermont, Connecticut. And I lived up in that area there for a little bit. Sure is beautiful up there, but ain't nothing that compares to Appalachia. My home, sweet home. So it's Appalachia we're going to be talking about. And although it is very beautiful to get into the woods during fall in Appalachia, there are a lot of challenges that come with that. So we're going to be talking about some of those challenges. What if it rains all the time? And it tends to do that in Appalachia. The mountains create their own weather. What do you do? Temperatures going up, getting up into the 80s sometimes during the day. Then they're dropping down into the 50s during the night. Of course, I'm here in the USA, so I'm talking in Fahrenheit, not in Celsius. I'll let you guys do the conversions on your own. But that's very warm, very hot, and it's very cool. And then you get rain. You never know if it's going to rain on you. You can make all these plans and you get into the woods and it just rains the whole time you're out there. Well, that happened to me on an adventure that I'm going to take you along with me on in the mountains of Appalachia, right at the end of September, with those teeter-totter temperatures and all that rain. Another thing you got to think about in Appalachia is all the spooky, mysterious things that exist and take place in the mountains and the hollers. Oh, the old folks will tell you all sorts of stories. I've heard them, I've seen them, I've experienced them. Just like on this adventure here that I'm going to take you on in this episode of Practical Woodsman. Now, I ain't saying that haints and boogers and folklore creatures show up on this adventure for a certainty. But I ain't telling you that they, for a certainty, don't show up on this adventure, so you don't want to miss it. Before we get into all this, we got to do the musical introduction to get us all in the mood. Winkety, winkety. So don't go nowhere. Stick around. We'll be right back when that ends. That's right.
Put a camp up right here.
Well, the old Appalachian Mountains. A lot of folklore and spooky and mysterious things happen up in those mountains. Ain't no other time of year where spooky, mysterious things happen quite like in the fall. But it sure is beautiful in those mountains in the fall when the foliage starts to change and the cool nights can drop down quite cold at night, in fact. And during the day, it can get awfully hot. Draws a lot of people. And a lot of people like to look at the mountains in a superficial way, you know. A lot of tourists head down to Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, see the mountains this time of year. In fact, you can't hardly get a hotel room in the old Smokies during this time of year. Everybody's hoping to get a peek at peak foliage. A peek at peak foliage. And that's the truth. So, you ever want to get into the Smoky Mountains and see the peak foliage, take an old gander at the peak foliage, well, you better make arrangements way ahead of time, because there's people all over the United States trying to get in and do the same thing. There's people from other countries. Yeah, that's right. People from Japan, people from Europe, people from Ukraine and Russia, Georgia. So if you want to see peak foliage, if you want to take a peek at peak foliage in the old Smoky Mountains, you better plan for that out a long time ahead of time, because it's going to be crazy. Well, it's nice that I grew up in a time where property and heritage was just passed down to me. So my grandpappy says to me one time, I hear you're going out back into the old property, back up into those old mountains, down into those old hollers. It was about the end of September, right about this same time of year. I said, that's right, Pappy. He says, well, do you know I've got an old shanty back there, about a day's journey in. He says, it's an old shanty. It's kind of a refuge from the really bad weather that might sneak right up on you. I said, well, thank you, Grandpappy. He says, now listen, I'm sure you're already aware of this, but this time of year is when all the haints and the boogers and all the weird things come out into the mountains. You want to keep your eyes open, and you want to be aware of what you might run into in the middle of the night or just coming around the corner. I said, I'm aware of that, Pappy. He says, you get into that shanty, that little shelter that I built out there. He built it with his own hands, by the way. My grandpappy had his own sawmill. He had a team of horses. He'd ride up into those old Appalachian mountains all the time. Cutting lumber. He loved cutting lumber. He loved trees. He'd get so far out there, he couldn't get back in a single day. So what he did was, he built his own shelter out there. I remember Granny getting him in a hard time about it when he'd be missing for a day or two. And he'd say, I spent the night up out there at the old shanty. That's what he called it. It just looked like a refuge, just like a shelter that he built out of wood. But he took good care of it. Got an Uncle Jerry. My Uncle Jerry, they built something real similar just a couple years ago. Just miles back on his property. It's all property, mountains and hollers that been passed down over generations. Generations of time. We ain't really living in that age anymore. Nowadays, if you want hundreds of acres of pristine wilderness, you kind of got to be born into it, or you got to be a movie star. Just saw that Robert Redford died here recently, and I was watching some interviews with him. He had something like 6,000 acres or something like that out in Utah. He loves that Utah land. Well, Utah's fine. I'm not going to knock anybody else's land or the territories of their heart. But for me, it's Appalachia. It's the Appalachian Mountains. That's just where my family's always been. My ex-wife was a historian. She says, I want to do your family tree. She was a Philly girl, born and raised in Philadelphia. And one thing I learned up there is people would ask me, where are you from? I'd say, where I'm from Appalachia, along the border of West Virginia, Kentucky, and southeastern Ohio, right there where those three states come together. And they'd say, no, that's not what we're asking. We're asking, where's your people from? And I'd say, Appalachia. They'd say, no. Where are you from? Are you from Scotland? Or are you from England? Or where are you from? You from Italy? You from France? You from Germany? I just shrugged my shoulders. I say, I'm from Appalachia. No, it can't be, they'd say. Well, one thing I learned about that area up there is that everybody in that area is like second generation, either first generation American or second generation American. My wife, being a historian, she says, I'm going to do your family tree. I'm going to put this issue to rest once and for all. And I said, you do that. She did my family tree. She said, you've been here as long as anybody has. She discovered that Abraham Lincoln, famous American president, Abraham Lincoln and I are related. And my people have been in the Appalachian Mountains for as long as the white man has been here. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. For somebody who had gone into history, loved history, she was still shocked that there are people like me around. And I'm sure a lot of you listening are like that too. And if you ain't an original American, and what I mean by that is somebody who just come right off the boat and been here ever since, it's not to make you feel bad or anything like that, or less American or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a matter of pride for myself. I love the idea that my family has been in these hills and hollers for hundreds of years. I've got frontiersman blood pumping through my veins. Well, I like to get up in those old mountains, hear the trees and the history talk to me. I hear the ground and the creeks and the streams tell me stories. I like to run into the old strange things. So I got my own stories to tell. I don't have to hear anybody tell me about boogers and haints. I want to see it for myself. So I decided I was going to go out into the deep mountain wilderness. One fall, as I do every fall, just about. I was going to go last year, but I come down sick. Didn't get to go. So I'm looking forward to it this year. And on this occasion, I'd gotten my brother and my friend Jeffrey with me. I said, let's go out there, about 3 days journey. Take a look at the land. Let it talk to us. See if we run into anything interesting. They said, all right. And so here we were, looking out over this beautiful land, these beautiful mountains with all the history. Tough people come up into these mountains. And their stories and their tales and their wisdom have been passed along for hundreds of years. Me and little brother and Jeffrey, we got into these mountains and started hiking along. We had a place we had in mind. It was going to take us about 3 days to get there. And looking at the forecast was looking real nice. It was supposed to be pleasant and dry. But as I say, you can't always trust the weatherman. You get up in the Appalachian Mountains and Those mountains, those dear old mountains, they create their own weather. They got a mind of their own. And the more time you spend up in there, the more you understand that. The more you understand that whatever you have planned and got in mind is probably the opposite of what's actually going to happen. So with the map in hand, we set off. Me and little brother, my buddy Jeffrey, got going not too far into the thing and realized we had to stop, go get water. And my friend Jeffrey, he's not from the mountains, he's from a local town, so kind of cityfied. Had brought his own map. I said, that map ain't gonna do you no good. Where we're going, Grandpappy has given me directions about how we're going to get there, and that map isn't going to show that. He says, I don't mind anyway. He wanted to bring his own map, and sure enough, he did. We call him the navigator. On all the trips we take, he's the navigator. On most of these areas we go into that we don't know, but this was family property, family mountains and family hollers. I said, that map ain't gonna do you no good. I don't care, he says. And all along this way, he kept checking that map. Well, that was just fine with me and little brother. We felt that kept him busy and occupied and gave him something to do. We had stand next to this tree. We had run out of water kind of early on the way. He's checking the map, trying to figure out where the nearest rivers and creeks were and springs and stuff like that. I said, you don't need that. Put that away. And we dumped our bags, and I took him where my grandpa had said that for sure we'd find some water, and sure enough, we did find water there. Turned out it wasn't on the map. Oh, but what a beautiful area and time of year that was. The leaves were just starting to come down. And when we got started on this trip, things were pretty dry, but it was kind of sprinkling on and off as we were going along. So for too long, we were already starting to get kind of wet and some kind of high humidity. So things weren't drying as fast as we'd had liked them to. But we were enjoying the surroundings and the trees. I know a lot of people love getting up to a high point. They call them vistas. All the modern hippie backpackers, they call these things vistas. And this is what they live for, getting up on top of a high point and looking out and being able to see over a large area of land. Well, that has never appealed to me. I mean, it's fine, but I ain't out there for vistas. I'm out there to get swallowed up by the Appalachian backcountry. And that's what I love. I love to be just closed in by trees and the mountains and the hollers. So we were enjoying ourselves, hiking along. We almost passed up Grandpa's shanty, his little shelter they had built with his own two hands. Not long ago, he'd ridden a horse out there and dragged out some lumber and created some of his own lumber while he was out there. He had all these hand tools, and he could make boards and logs out of just using his hands and these hands tools. Everything could just fit into a single pack. And he'd drape that on his horse, go riding his horse out there, and it was amazing what Grandpa could do with his own hands. We almost passed it up. It was hidden off this main trail. He had told me to be careful about it. He said, you could pass it up, you could go another 5 miles. He said, you never even know that it was there. Well, only because he told me that I look over and say, I need to go explore this a little bit. And I went into the woods there and I discovered Papaw's old shanty. And I said, boys, let's go check out Papaw's shanty over here, his shelter. We got into there, you wouldn't believe it. How beautiful this thing was. Tin roof. Had a nice little fire pit right out front of this thing. Couldn't have been built better. I talked to my grandpa later about it. I said, how long did it take you to make that? He said, about a weekend. I said, oh, get out of here. He said, no, it took me about 3 days. Yeah, your granny was asking, what took you so long to come back home? He said, I was out there building a shanty, my little shelter. He says, because when I go out there so long, he says, I like to know that I got a place where I can bunk at on my way back. What a beautiful little shanty this thing was. Beautiful little shelter. Now I understood. My Papaw would disappear for several days at a time in the middle of the winter time. Middle of the winter, didn't matter. It didn't matter if a blizzard blowed in or not. My Papaw knew if he could just get his horse or his old mule back to that shelter about the halfway point, well, he could just hunker in there and didn't have anything to worry about. So me and little brother and my buddy Jeffrey, we stopped there. Of course, my buddy Jeffrey had to study his highfalutin professional topographical map. I said, Jeffrey, that thing's not going to do you no good. That thing's not going to do you no good. That was made by the state or the county, and it ain't no better than what Papaw telling me we need to do. He says, I don't care. I'm the navigator. I want to look into this thing. So he's trying to figure out where the nearby towns are and all that. We just let him at it. While we're there, it really started to rain. It started to come down on us hard. And I went out and I looked up at the sky and I stuck my finger in my mouth and held it up to the wind, and I tried to use all the cues, all the knowledge that had been passed down to me to try to figure out what's the weather going to do. And when I realized we were in for a day of soaking wet rain. Mind you, up to this point, it had just been sprinkling here and there. I mean, we were already kind of damp and wet. And I was carrying a shelter, you'll see later. But I wasn't looking forward to pitching it. Not when we had this perfectly beautiful shelter here, this shanty that my grandpa had built for his outings into the deep, deep mountains, searching for old growth forest for his sawmill. And I said, boys, what do you say? What do you say we call this home for the night? Well, little brother, he was just fine with that. He started unpacking. He loved it, same as me. Loved being in this little shack that my grandpa built with his own 2 hands over the course of a weekend. Who knows how long ago? I think he said he'd been sitting there for 30 years, something like that. So little brother started setting up, and my city-fied friend, old Jeffrey, he wasn't sold. He didn't think like we'd covered enough ground that day. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, we can just make it up tomorrow. But the more I went out and I looked up at the sky, and I, again, licked my pointer finger and held it up into the wind, and I felt what the wind was doing, and I saw what the trees were saying, the more it made sense to me that we should just call it a night. Just kind of take it easy and spend the evening there. And finally, after a vote, that's what we all decided to do. It was about the time we decided this, that the rain really started coming down hard, really hard. And along with the rain, this really heavy fog rolled in. Now, if you're from Appalachia, you're back in those hills and hollers, you know that the fog can sometimes bring other things with it. And I didn't want to really scare my city-fied friend Jeffrey by bringing that up. But little brother and I, we knew we were in for an interesting night. And we both looked at each other. When this fog started rolling in, it would rain and then the fog would roll in. Sometimes the fog was right there with the rain. And I made it a point to make sure that the flash was on when I was taking these pictures. Now you got to remember, this time, in this age, nobody had the computer phones that we have today. No, it weren't like that. People had flip phones. In fact, I think all of us on this trip were using flip phones. But as far as these highfalutin smartphones, they just do everything, see into the dark, they take video and pictures and ultra super refined resolution. There weren't nothing like that. You remember those flip phones, you could take some video, but they were like 10 seconds long, and they were really pixelated. You couldn't see anything. So on this occasion, I wasn't using my phone to take any of these pictures. I had an actual camera, and I made sure to turn on the flash, because I wanted the flash to capture the fog, the really thick, dense fog that was rolling in on us. I wanted to capture the raindrops and the effect of this beautiful night up in these Appalachian mountains. So there we were, in this beautiful little shanty, as my grandpappy used to call it. Really just a shelter halfway between where my grandpa lived and where he'd like to get into these old growth forests. And then he'd stop here at this shanty, this refuge, to spend the night, especially if the weather was really nasty. He knew he could get in there and he wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Had our supper, sat around jawing and palavering, drinking some Kentucky bourbon whiskey. It started getting late. But man, I'll tell you what, that rain come down real hard and then real soft. But it never stopped completely. But we knew we were okay, as long as we were at that old shanty that my grandpa built with his own hands. In the night, we started to get a little low on water. My Papaw told me, freshwater spring, you just go down about 3/4 of the way over the side of the mountain. So there's a freshwater spring, comes out all natural, just shoots out of the side of the mountain. But that was quite a trip down the mountain. None of us were really eager to go down there. As we were in this shanty in the middle of the night, during the heaviest parts of the rain, me and little brother could have sworn we heard a voice through that rain. And what we were almost certain we could hear through that downpour was this whisper, this eerie whisper through the downpour. And it said, "Do you know where you are? Do you know where you are?" And a couple times, the old city-fied friend that was with us, old Jeffrey, he'd look over at us. He'd say, "Did you hear that?" And me and little brother, we'd look at each other. We'd look back at Jeffrey. We didn't want to scare him. "No, I didn't hear a thing. What'd you hear?" He said, "I could have sworn I heard somebody talking." through those dark trees, through that downpour. Must be the whiskey talking, he says. Must be the whiskey talking. Well, we all went to sleep that night in Papaw's old shanty. When little brother and I woke up, our friend Jeffrey, he was already up. He was getting water off the water spout, off that tin roof of my Papaw's shanty. We said, sure, that's the way we do it. Little brother and I, we did the same thing. We just held our pots out, collected the rainwater falling off the roof of Papaw's shanty. We had our coffee and our breakfast. Took our time around Papaw's old shanty, and kind of sad to part ways with her. But we all got packed up and ready to go and started up through the woods. Now, a lot of people complain about the stones through the forest. They say it makes hiking along a lot complicated. And a lot of folks, you know, a lot of these hippie backpackers, they think there just shouldn't be any obstructions or anything at all through the woods. They just want a highway, basically, that they can walk and they can just close their eyes and not worry about tripping over nothing. Well, that ain't real wilderness, is it? No, it ain't. That ain't real wilderness. If you want real wilderness, you want to be walking along through some woods that has not been babyfied for you. You got to put in a little bit of effort. You got to be inconvenienced a little bit. That's the whole thing about loving Mother Nature and loving Appalachia and loving the mountains. Those old mountains and the hollers, you want them just the way they are. You don't want nobody coming ahead of you and making everything so super simple for you. I love the rocks. I love the trees that have fallen down. You got to climb over and climb under. I love getting my boots dirty and wet. I love all that. Because that's what loving the natural world is all about. So we got on our way, and it never did stop raining. That fog never did go away completely. Boy, we got wet. We sure did get wet. The rain just kept coming down in buckets all day long. Back in those days, the camera I was using was not like these highfalutin iPhones that we're all using today. But every year when the phones come out, boy, they pack in all sorts of technology into those things, right? I mean, you can take a video anywhere. Ultra 4K, 8K, pick up sound just right. Kind of like the camera I'm using right now. Record this show. Does all sorts of things for me. Back then, nobody had phones like that. You got to remember, I had a camera. So I couldn't really take no video. And I couldn't have my camera out in the pouring rain, so I didn't get a lot of the pictures I would have liked to have gotten on that trip. Nowadays, I can just pull out my phone. Doesn't matter if it's pouring rain, whatever. I take video, take pictures. Not back in. During the worst parts of this rain, I had to cover up the camera, make sure it didn't get no rain or wet on it. But still, I've just found the mountains, the nature of the mountains with all that rain and all that wetness so beautiful. I wanted to capture it with such beauty, and that's kind of the thing, you know, the uglier the conditions are out in Appalachian wilderness, the more beautiful your pictures are and your memories and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you got to deal with some of the spooky things that come along with that. And there were a few times along the trail that day where I could have sworn I heard that voice. Do you know where you are? And then every time I'd hear it, I'd look over at little brother. He'd look back at me with a knowing look on his face. And he just kind of nodded at me. And we look over at our city-fied buddy, Jeffrey. He'd just keep hiking along, oblivious. Well, one of the benefits of being in those sorts of conditions where it's just so wet is that you can get your water kind of anywhere. And we were kind of up on top of this mountain. We didn't come across any creeks or rivers or anything like that. But because it was so wet, we were able to find these little streams and these little puddles of water here and there. And we'd get down, we'd filter some of that water out. I remember my city-fied friend, he had a water filter with him. Little brother and I, mostly we were used to just boiling our water or just drinking it like it was. But because we had our friend Jeffrey with us, we yielded to his sensibilities and we allowed him to filter out his water out of these little puddles and little ravines and stuff along the way. And that just made him as happy as a lark. So we hiked along all day. I mean, we were soaking wet. And we come up onto this rocky mountain that we had to climb. It was almost vertical. I mean, it was almost straight up. And we didn't have, I'm not a mountain climbing type of person. I have no interest whatsoever in getting above tree line and just seeing, like I think I mentioned earlier, no interest whatsoever in just getting up to a high point and just looking out at things. That does not interest me in the least bit. And I don't understand the mentality of people who are interested by that sort of thing. For me, I want to be hugged by the natural world. I want to be enveloped by it. And that's my only interest in it. And if I have to climb some rocks and climb up a vertical face to get from one place to another in order to experience that, well, I'm willing to do it. But I don't want to get up just to the top of a mountain just so I can say I did. I think that's ridiculous. I think a lot of people are in it for that. Well, they can have it. They're missing out. As you can see, the fog rolling in again. This fog followed us all the way. And the old folks would say, you were not only enveloped by the natural world, you were getting enveloped by the unnatural world too. The Haints and the boogers and the things people don't talk about in the daylight. Well, we climbed up this rock face, and as we got up there, we were looking around, stopped to have a little bit of lunch. Little brother and I got a wonderful picture. You've probably seen this picture before. I use it all the time because I just think it's so beautiful. It just captures the trip so well. Yeah, little brother and I, up on those rocks, about a day's journey from Papaw's old Shanty. And there we stopped to have lunch. And there was this big rock mountain that went further than where we were at. I said, I got to go up and explore that. I got to see what's over on the other side. And our city-fied friend, Jeffrey, he says, now, come on now. We're losing day. We got to keep going. I said, listen, when you get out here and all this beauty, that's one way to do it. You can run around like a chicken with its head cut off, like you're on a schedule, just like you do out there in the real world. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to be spontaneous and say, let your curiosity and your love of nature take over and say, what is up over that hill? I gotta see. What is around that bend? I gotta see. Will it mean that I'll get where I want to go a little bit later? It might. Will it be worth the cost in time and energy? For sure, it'll be worth the cost in time and energy. So I said, I'm going. We said to Jeffrey, you can go ahead and keep hiking if you want to. We'll catch up to you. But I have to see what's on the other side of that. And there was this huge rock wall. I didn't even take my pack off. I started up. I wanted to see. I got near the top. I turned around to my brother, who was still with me, little brother. I said, if you want to come up here, why don't you take off your pack? Take off your pack. It'd be a lot easier to get up here if you do that. He said, all right. He took off his pack and he joined me. He climbed up those rocks with me just to see what was on the other side. Sometimes you just got to see what's on the other side. And that's where I sat. And I looked out over this foggy, misty cliff. The trees were just buried in all this mist and fog. It was wonderful. My little brother got up there with me. We were looking at that together, and we talked about that for a good long time. But we heard that voice. Do you know where you are? Little brother and I looked at each other. Did you hear that? I said. He nodded his head. Think we should tell Jeffrey about that? He shook his head. Nope. Let's keep that to ourselves. The fog. It seemed like the thicker the fog was, the clearer that voice was. So we come down off that big rocky top. We started kicking up our heels. You know what that means? It means we started hiking faster, trying to catch up to old Jeffrey. He was tired. We were all tired. It had been a long day. Legs are barking, feet barking, everything barking. Soaking wet. Something about getting soaking wet. Now, if this happens to you out in the woods, it's no big deal. You crawl up under your shelter, and after a few hours, you start to dry out. But when it don't stop raining for like 3 or 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, my goodness gracious, it starts to drain you. It starts to drain the willpower right out of you and the enthusiasm right out of you. Everything starts to irritate you. You start to feel miserable all the time. Your feet are miserable. Your arms are miserable. Your head's miserable. Everything's miserable. It's like soaking in a bathtub for 6 days. You know, if you can imagine that. It just gets miserable. No matter how much you love the woods and the natural world, it just gets to you. It starts to suck the energy and the enthusiasm right out of you. But my goodness, if you're willing and able to wander into something like that, the payoffs are simply glorious. You will never have better stories to tell. You will never have better experiences. You will never feel as close to anybody than somebody you've gone through this with. It's like the misery accentuates the beauty. And if you're willing to go through that misery, well then, you're there to see the woods in all its glory in a way that most people will never see it. It's just something exquisite. It just cannot be properly communicated in a video or a podcast or anything like that. You've got to be there. And it is miserable. And you feel miserable. But then later when you get home, you start going through that camera roll, or you start looking at those videos, or you start telling those stories. You start replaying those memories. It's better than any blue sky day that you could ever spend out in the woods. We weren't going to make it to where we were hoping to make it. All because I'd said, no, I got to see what's up over that rock mountain there. Got to see what's on the other side. There wasn't really anything on the other side. There was just trees. There were trees and fog and a great big drop off and lots of rocks. But you know, the thing is, At least I know that. I know what's on the other side. Anybody who would just rush right through there would not know what's on the other side. They would forever have to live wondering what was on the other side. And when I come back and I talk to old Grandpappy, I said, Grandpappy, there's this area up there, just about a day's journey from your old shanty, and a big old rock mountain up there. And how many times you walked by that? He said, I've walked by that 100 times. I said, well, then do you know what's on the other side of it? He says, I do know what's on the other side of it. He said, because I did not walk by it the first time. He said, I asked myself the same question. What's on the other side? And he said, I scrambled up there. It weren't easy. Not at my age, it weren't easy. But I scrambled up there and I went and I saw what's on the other side. So he says, now I can walk right by there and never have to wonder what's on the other side. Well, so we get into this area. We look down over this ravine and I saw a creek. Beautiful crystal clear water flowing through this creek, and it was down this really steep ravine, and we still had a long way to go before we were trying to get to where we were going to go. And we just all said, there was kind of a flat area there. There were plenty of stones laying around. I said, let's get down into there. Let's throw together a fire ring and we'll just make a camp right there. Little brother said, that's a wonderful idea. Let's do that. Old Jeffrey said, we got to keep going. We got to keep going. I said, Jeffrey, it's not getting any drier and the sun is not getting any higher in the sky. We have to stop here. This is what we got to do. I want to get a fire going tonight. And with all this rain that's been happening for like the past 3 days, it's going to take like 2 hours for me to get a fire going. He says, all right. So he finally yielded to that. We go down over this ravine. It was hairy. It was not easy to get down the side of that ravine. It was very, very steep, and we were very, very wet. Everything was very wet. It was very muddy, and the ravine was very high too. But by grasping some tree roots and stuff like that, we finally got down into that ravine. I had the boys, had them throw together a fire mound, a fire ring or a fire pit so that we could get a fire going. I pitched our shelter. First time I had to pitch it on this excursion. Just a place where we could get up out of the rain, because I tell you what, it never stopped raining completely. Never stopped raining completely. Not in the 3 days we were out there did it stop raining completely. It would level off. It would get a little bit milder, but it was always raining. Everything was wet. If you're wondering about what it's like to be out there and how to stay dry, the answer is you don't stay dry. Not after 3 days. Not after 3 days in conditions like that. You might be able to hold it off a little bit. You might be able to minimize the effects a little bit, but there's no way. They don't make any equipment, not even today, do they make any equipment that will keep you for sure completely dry. What does that mean? It means if you want to be out there and you want to experience these things, you just gotta be willing to eventually get wet. And that's what we were doing. Walking around, our feet barking, everything. We're just miserable because we've been wet for 2 full days now. But get the shelter up. And once you get into the shelter, just getting out of the direct rain is immensely, immensely satisfying. What a relief when you're not in the direct rain. So if you can just get a shelter up, you can start to feel like you're drying out. Even if you're not drying out all that much, you can start to feel like you are. And not being in the direct weather like that is such a relief. So I got my shelter up. It's a 4-man floorless teepee shelter. It's just a tarp and you stick a stick up the middle of it. The boys had done their job in the rain to get a fire ring going. We were down here in this ravine. It's so beautiful. Night started sat in on us, and the fog rolled in. Fog rolled in real thick. You could hear the tippity-tappity of the rain continuing to come down. Did not quit. It never quit. And we get caught up in conversation, but every once in a while it would sound like the wind was talking to us, and it would say, "Do you know where you are?" And every time, little brother and I'd take a little glance at each other and just keep talking, just to keep our friend Jeffrey calm and unworried about those sorts of things. It took me 2 hours to get a fire going in those sorts of conditions after like 3 days of rain, middle of the fog, in the rain. But I finally got an all-night fire going. You can see us here, fog and rain. And the effect that you're seeing from the fire is the reflection of the fire on the water droplets that are in the air. Nothing mystic about this. It's just the light reflecting on the water droplets and the fog that is hanging in the air. Oh, 2 hours. 2 hours of nonstop work to get that fire going with soaking wet. Everything soaking wet, not just soaking wet, firewood, everything soaking wet. And I managed to get that fire going. And from that fire, my friend Jeffrey is convinced to this day that I can get a fire started underwater. Underwater if I have to. And he ain't too far from the truth. Once I set my mind to it, if I am convinced that I want and I need a fire, I don't care how long it takes me, I am getting a fire, and I don't care what the circumstances are. Now, there are other times where I get set up a camp and I just say to myself, I'm tired, I'm going to go sleep. I don't want to spend 2 hours getting a fire going. But on this night, I spent a solid 2 hours in the rain after 3 days of rain and thick fog, and I got that fire going. It was well worth it. Well, there were a lot of things that happened that night. I'm not going to go into all the details. We had some really deep conversations. There were some scares. For example, we heard something down in the woods, further down in the holler there, or there was something moving about. We weren't sure what it was. We heard the voice a few times. Little brother and I glanced over at each other, but we just kind of shrugged it off. It was a haint that was following us around, we were sure. And we thought that we would just hold on to that story and go back and tell Grandpappy about it. But as far as worrying about being harmed or anything like that, we weren't really concerned about it. We were used to these sorts of things and had been conditioned by family stories and folklore to just kind of mind our business and go about things. We all slept good that night. Slept dry. Woke up dry. Ready to get wet again. In fact, we had stopped by Walmart or some kind of store before this trip, knowing how wet it was supposed to be. And I think we had each spent, and I ain't making this up, I think we had each spent like $3 on a rain suit, just in case it got really, really bad. And it had. The problem with these rain suits, these $3 rain suits, which are practically, they're just made out of plastic, more or less. They don't breathe. And so you put them on and they protect you from the rain that's coming right down on top of you. But because they don't breathe, you sweat. You get really hot really fast with just a minimum amount of exertion, and you begin to sweat and you get wet from the inside out. Meaning your body sweats, it's trying to breathe, it's trying to get rid of all this perspiration and stuff, can't go nowhere because it's trapped inside this plastic layer. And so you kind of get wetter wearing these rain outfits than if you just don't wear anything at all. But as we got up for breakfast that morning to break down camp and to kind of head off, I saw that the boys had put on their rain suits. And it was keeping the heavy rain from, soaking them directly. But by this time, everything was just soaking wet. There was no way to stay dry. There is no way to stay dry in these sorts of conditions, no matter what. You can go to the highfalutin outdoor stores, Cabela's, REI. I don't know what you folks have overseas, but you can go to any of these places and you can have the greatest plan in mind for how to stay dry in these sorts of conditions. All of your plans will be for nothing after a full day. So after a full day, no matter how much money you've spent to stay dry in the backcountry, after a day of being in those conditions, you will give up. You will determine that there is nothing that science has produced that can completely prevent Mother Nature from eventually affecting you in the way she intends to. And that's what happened here. So this was kind of around breakfast. That day we got up, mingled around our camp. We tore down camp, got back on our way, and but we were all soaking wet. The rain suits did not stay on for very long. As soon as you start walking, you start exerting energy, then your body starts heating up, and it's like a furnace within those rain outfits. So they come off pretty soon. As soon as we started moving, our spirits started to rise again once we got our silly rain suits off and realized the futility of those. This was the day that we were just hoping to get where we were going, and got up on a real high point. So we're up on this ridge along the mountain, got so high up and got to some of these vistas that people make their whole lives revolve around these vistas. I think they're ridiculous. You just want to get up to a high point and just so you can say you did, and you just want to be able to look over a bunch of stuff from a high point just to say you did. It's a very temporary and superficial thrill, is why it makes no sense to me. There's no substance to it. There's no substance to a vista. All right, let's designate those as tourist lookout spots. Let's let them have it. But for people who love the woods, we have no purpose for just vistas. I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, back over the summer, and they have this famous mountain called Lookout Mountain. The whole purpose of Lookout Mountain is to get up there to look out. Look out over Chattanooga and look out over Georgia. It's actually located in Georgia, but you're looking out over Chattanooga, Tennessee. I got up there, there's 900 million people up there. People from all over the world. There's a lot of Indians, a lot of people from other countries. They just flock there. Just flock there. Just to be able to be high and look out over things. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I have a very kind of a low opinion of people who are out chasing vistas. I'm chasing solitude and a complete immersion in the natural world. I'm not here to preach to you, but anyway, that's the way I feel about it. So we get up to this vista area, and then we start coming down. We come down to this area where the timber rattlesnakes were as thick as briar patches. Everywhere we stepped, there was a timber rattlesnake there. and they're dangerous. And I was surprised. I was surprised to see so many timber rattlesnakes out in these conditions, because typically what you think of when you're looking out for snakes is you're looking out for where warm sunlight is coming down through the foliage, and it's splashed on a part of the ground. A lot of times you'll find snakes that will come out of their hiding areas, and they'll come and they'll curl up or stretch out where the sunlight is. They're just like cats. If you think about cats and the way house cats will chase a sunbeam coming through the window, they want to get up underneath there and get warm and everything. That's typically where you'll see snakes, and that's typically where you want to be careful when you're hiking along through the woods. You got a sunbeam coming down, splashing out on the forest floor. That's where you want to keep your eye open for these dangerous snakes, like timber rattlesnakes, copperheads, that sort of thing. So we hadn't seen the sun in like 4 days by this point. And here we come walking through this area of the woods, and there were just timber rattlesnakes everywhere. No sunlight, low temperatures, rain, fog, and yet all these snakes were out everywhere. So I wish I knew what explained that in late September, but I can't really explain it. Maybe somebody out there can. If you can explain what the timber rattlesnakes were doing in late September, no sunlight for 3-4 days, rain, and yet they're still out all over the place, I would love to hear it. So you can see us walking around here, avoiding the timber rattlesnakes and all that. Well, finally we turned around, felt like we'd had enough. We headed back through the rain, ended up back at Papaw's Shanty after a couple more nights. Spent another night there, Papaw's Shanty, and I said to myself, I don't know if I'll ever be back here again. I was living in Philadelphia at the time. I was kind of disconnected from family back home. So I just didn't know if I was ever going to be back at Papaw's old refuge, his old shelter, ever again. So we took a couple more pictures, made some more memories there. And then the next morning we got up, had breakfast, we headed back, and my brother was eager to get out of his shoes, get some flip-flops on. By the way, we used to call those flip-flops thongs. The whole time I was growing up, my family, my mom, me, my whole family, we called those thongs. And there's a lot of language like that us Appalachian folk have, that once you go out into the broader world, like I said, I was living in Philadelphia for a while, and you can't really keep calling things the way you're used to calling them. Like we used to call what everybody else calls bell peppers, we call mangoes. We never had tropical mangoes. Growing up, they never got into the mountains, into the Appalachians. So the only thing we had were mangoes that we called, our mangoes were what people commonly call bell peppers. This is the way our language was. And flip-flops. Everybody calls these shoes like my brother's putting on here flip-flops, but we always called those thongs. And a lot of folks still naturally call the bell peppers mangoes, and a lot of people naturally call the flip-flops thongs. One is not right and the other is not wrong. It's just culture and tradition, and a lot of Appalachian culture and tradition comes from old language. So while you might be saying that's silly and it makes no sense, the truth is that your way of speaking is probably the newer way of speaking, meaning that at some time in the past, that's what almost everybody called those things, the Appalachian words for those things. So anyway, never did figure out where that voice was coming from. Do you know where you are? But I've often thought about it throughout my life. What was that voice trying to say? It's kind of profound if you think about it. Right now, do you know where you are? Are you where you want to be? Well, folks, I appreciate you joining me for this adventure of the Practical Woodsman, and I hope you're all doing well out there. It's getting late here where I'm at. I'm getting tired. I reckon I'll see you in the next episode of the Practical Woodsman. Y'all take care.